Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today in regards to homeschooling. And so I've mentioned in previous videos that we do homeschool our children. We've always homeschooled our children. It was something that my husband and I talked about even prior to our oldest daughter being born. And I'll be honest, at first I was not on board at all. But things changed and I became more on board with the fact of homeschooling our children, and I absolutely love it. It's not to say that homeschooling doesn't come without its challenges. There are definitely plenty of challenges when it comes to homeschooling your children. One of the biggest challenges, honestly, is that every single child you have is going to learn differently. So you have to figure out basically which learning style is best for each child. And now there are some things that obviously, like the sciences and stuff like that. For my kids, they learned science, Spanish, geography, all that basically the same. But it's like the core classes, kind of like language arts and math, that both my girls are. I have two that are in like second and fourth grade, and then one that's still in pre-K. But all my kids learn a little bit differently. And I actually want to focus a little bit more on my oldest daughter right now, as hopefully to give some sort of encouragement to parents out there who are homeschooling their children, especially ones who are having a hard time with helping their children with reading. So, my oldest daughter is 9 years old. She'll be 10 soon. And she has, it was interesting because she actually was reading really, really well at like the age of 4, like super well. And she did like the whole hooked on phonics thing and was doing really, really good with it. And then all of a sudden, around 5 years old or so, she kind of just forgot it all. And so part of that may have been that we did change curriculum. So things she's being taught things a little bit differently. Um, or it was the fact that she has a really, really good memory. So I think what was probably more the deal was the books she had for like the hooked on phonics stuff. She was actually memorizing them. And she was memorizing them as the book and not as like the individual words and stuff like that. So we had a little bit of a problem with her kind of almost like regressing with her reading. And we continued to work on it. And it was something that, as she's my first child going through this, it's obviously a learning curve for me as well, too. And so, trying to find the right curriculum that worked for her, trying to find the right way to teach her and everything else. And it got to the point one time where we honestly did kindergarten for like, I want to say, well, we had a kindergarten curriculum that actually wasn't that great. And then we switched to a different curriculum. So I moved her basically up into first grade because she had finished her kindergarten curriculum for reading and had been doing really well. And then I switched to a different curriculum because I didn't think the curriculum we originally had was comprehensive enough. And so I switched her to a more comprehensive curriculum, which actually did fully teach more things. And she just like tanked. Because there was more things that like she was learning and supposed to be understanding, and it still has like phonics involved in it, so it's still some of the stuff that she did when she was 4 years old. So it still has phonics. It had sight words ladders and everything else, and it was kind of a combination of different different learning styles, and some of it worked for her, some of it didn't. And it was one of those things that from 5 to 6 years old she really, really struggled with reading. And again, she could memorize the words, but the minute she saw it like in a book, she no longer remembered the word. She could remember in a sight words ladder, had the sight words ladder memorized, but then trying to apply it to an actual story, she lost it. And so it was different stuff that we tried and we tried to work with and everything else. And then around 7 years old, it actually started to click. Like I literally remember the moment where it was like kind of like a light bulb moment where everything started to make sense for her. And her brain basically finally was developed enough basically to start understanding these principles, things that we have been practicing for a year and a half at this point. All of a sudden she knew it all and she could apply it everywhere. Like she could do a sight words ladder and then read a book that had those words from the sight words ladder in it. Like that's the way it kind of worked. Is she would do a sight words ladder and then there was a book that corresponded with that sight words ladder and also with the phonics cards she was learning. And she would read that book and it finally made sense. And it was, an age appropriate book, like, the cat ran, stuff like that. Whatever the age appropriate level was for her, that's what she was learning. And so it was one of those things where her and I honestly both cried a fair amount. I remember one time she's sitting on my bed before she turned 7, and she just looked at me and she just started crying. She's like, "Mommy, it doesn't make sense. I can't read it." And it made me feel horrible because to a certain extent, I was just kind of pushing her through because at the time we were living in Florida, she needed to show progression. Florida is not like a B, C, D kind of state with homeschooling. It's you have to show progression from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And so I was basically pushing her on when she probably didn't have the concepts fully memorized or fully understood, just so that she would show progression, because I was afraid that if she wasn't showing enough progression, like the school board or whatever might get after me. But finally, at 7 years old, when we were still in Florida, it all started making sense to her. And she was able to start reading more and reading more and more and more. And then once we moved up here to Oklahoma, where there's literally like no regulations for homeschooling, I made sure, and even with my middle daughter, I'm making sure I take my time. I'm making sure they fully understand the principles they're learning, the words they're learning, the sounding out of the letters together, sight words, ladder, phonics, the whole 9 yards, working with my children at the level that they need to be at, but also helping them get to the next level and not trying to rush them through the process. And so it's actually been pretty exciting. My daughter is 9 years old. And quite frankly, I don't know if she's reading at a 4th grade level or not or whatever. But I am super excited because she's finally reading chapter books. So these are, hold on, this is the first one. This is the second one. So I actually really love these books. They're not in any curriculum. We actually, when we moved up here to Oklahoma, found the Misty Inn series in the library. And I read it to the girls because at the time, my oldest daughter was not yet at the level where she could read chapter books. For her, when we moved here, she had just turned 8, and she could read it, but she didn't quite remember it yet. Like, she still needed to read stories that were just a story, not chapters where she had to remember what happened in the last chapter that she read yesterday kind of deal. And so she wasn't quite at chapter level yet, but fairly recently, she's actually started reading these books at night. And these are books, I bought the whole series actually after I read the first 2 books to my kids from the library because I realized how much they loved it, and I love the books as well. But she's been reading chapter books now. So literally within, I want to say, the last 8 months, 6 months maybe, she's gone from not being able to comprehend or keep in her memory chapter book stories to now every night she's reading a chapter, and she's gone through these 2. She's on the 3rd one now, and she reads it by herself, and she tells me about the story, and we talk about and everything else, and I've read all the books, so I know she's reading it. I know, and I can hear her. It's so cute. I can hear her at night in her bed, quietly reading, and so I can hear her reading the words and everything else. And it's really exciting because basically we went from this point of being at 6 years old and having basically a meltdown because she can't understand, to at 9 years old, almost 10, getting into chapter books now. And it's one of those things where it takes time. Not every kid's going to be at the same level at the same time and everything else. And it's the same thing with my kids. Our middle daughter had a little bit of a speech impediment when she was younger, to where she was not properly saying things. So we had to really work with her on properly saying her letters first before we could even get to sounding out. And doing, sight words, ladders, and everything else, because she could say a word off a sight words ladder, but it had the wrong sound. And so we had to teach her, what the letters actually sound like, and work with her literally with her mouth, how you actually move your mouth to make those sounds. And so my oldest never had a speech impediment. She just kind of regressed or whatnot. And again, part of that's probably on me. I wouldn't, honestly, I'll just say part of that is on me. Because I wasn't teaching her the best way that was for her. And then once I finally realized how my oldest daughter learns, I was like, oh, this is what's good for her. And we worked on that. And now she's doing this, which I just want to say to any parent out there homeschooling their kid, whether it's reading, math, whatever your child's struggling with, just be patient. Take your time. Have some grace for yourself as well, too. A lot of this, no matter how old your child is, they're going to be learning things, and there's going to be times where you need to kind of learn along with them, how to help teach them and everything else. And so it's a beautiful thing though. Like I'm not even gonna lie, there's been times I've cried at night in tears of joy because I see how much my oldest daughter has grown over the last couple of years and how much more confident she is in her reading and everything else. And so I've really enjoyed that. And yes, we've had our struggles, but we've been able to overcome and learn together and figure out the best way for her to learn. And I'm still doing that with my middle daughter, and I'll be doing that with my youngest daughter, and I'll be doing that with my son whenever he gets old, whenever he's born and gets old enough to do that kind of stuff. So it's a process. Just take your time, though, guys. Don't rush your kids through stuff. I know each state has their different rules and regulations and everything else and how you homeschool and whatnot. But one of the things of the beauty basically about homeschooling is being able to do what's best for your children and in the time period that's best for them. And some kids, they may super excel at math and then not be as good at reading, or they may be really good at reading and not as good at math. I'll be honest, I'm a reader. I was slow at math. My husband, really good at math, slower at reading. So, it kind of is what it is. We both know how to do reading and math just fine. But when we were kids, my husband excelled at math, where I excelled at reading. So both my oldest daughters, actually, they really, really excel at math. And they've had a little bit of a struggle with reading, so they're more like their dad. But it's just take your time, have fun with it, learn together, love the process, and I promise eventually they'll get there. It may take a couple years, or, don't compare your kids to the other kids, because your kid is an individual and they're going to learn at the pace and in the way that's right for them. And that is your wonderful opportunity as a parent, homeschooling parent, to help them learn in that way. And some kids may not be book kids. They may be like watching or whatever. Like there's different ways you can learn, auditory, visually, everything like that. And so just find what's right for your kids, guys. Don't ever give up on them. It can be hard. It can be tough. I've cried many times and I've felt like a loser many times. But at the same time, my children are growing. They're learning. They're excelling in the way that they need to be excelling. And that's all that I can ask for. And if you do have older daughters or even younger daughters, the Misty End series is absolutely fantastic. It's super family friendly. There's no like bad stuff in it. There's no bad words. There's no bad interactions or anything like that. It's very, very wholesome. Very, very wholesome. And especially if your kids like, if you have daughters that like horses, this is an excellent series. You can get it off Amazon. But just wanted to give you that bit of encouragement. If you guys have any tips or anything like that about things you've gone through with your children with homeschooling, I'd love to hear them below because I'm learning all the time. So drop those tips in the comments below. Or if you have a curriculum that you really love, we use The Good and the Beautiful. But if you have a curriculum you really love, drop that in the comments below too. And I'd love to hear from you. Hope you all have a great day. Bye.